So I've just started my SQLBroker server, and here is how to configure it properly. Because SQLBroker is a generic executor on behalf of the clients, mostly intranet and private cloud applications. So its configuration is very important. First of all, we have profiles in our application. So this is the generic configuration, SQLBroker config. And if no other connection profile is defined, the default here is configured with SQLBroker default. Actually, these can be done with the regular way in a web config. In a config section, just define as many sections as you required. The first one, the SQLBroker config, is hard-coded, so this is what SQLBroker is looking for. These others are connection profiles, and one of them can be optionally be defined as the default profile if the client doesn't configure any profile. For the sake of fun, I created an additional profile. The profile name could be anything, because then the user can simply just references it. However, it must have a section tag. In that case, the web API application should be aware its existence. So what are the data that we have to define? First of all, the most important, the DB username. As seen here, I intentionally don't use and highly not recommending using the generic super user for Microsoft SQL Server, this SA. No, don't do that. Create your own user. In this case, it could be anything. I just created an SQLBroker. Actually, I haven't used it, but I'm going to show you how to create an database user that would work perfectly fine with this configuration. And the other one is the username. So instead of using the manager, this is an SAP Business One user. Here I created a special user. Actually, Linda, this is an existing database user in the demonstration database, and I assigned the indirect access user to this user, and then this user has access to perform all of these transactions. So again, very important, don't use the highly privileged manager or super user. Just create your user specifically for SQLBroker. So now let's come to the Postman to see what's happening with this configuration. Remember that our default is SQLBroker default. That is, this configuration is defined as default. So when there is a request, for example, this is a business object module, inventory gen exit, that is generic exit, which is issue for production most of the time. Let's request the first one. We define with these parameters only. Let's send it. The request is sent over to the server. Unfortunately, the response here is slow because I am recording, and then while recording, the execution time is lengthy. So 400 is definitely the bad request. Connection was rejected, unable to access SBO common database code -111. So this is 100% that the DB user is not kosher, is not okay for this access. So then why is that? Because actually when we come here and then check out if we have in the system, do we have any login? Yes, we have the user, and it has a public. So far so good. But let's check out what if I simply delete this user from here. Yes, because it is currently logged in. So let's just stop the server. Oh, don't stop it. So let's assume that this user created. So the way you can create, just create a login SQL broker, but this user doesn't have enough privileges. So what privileges do you have to create? It has a login, and then we have here the company database, and in a company database there is no user for this guy. Therefore, let's just create a new user, and the username, it could be actually anything, but just let's be consistent. SQL broker or SQL broker, and login name. So this is where you assign the login user. Yes. Okay, and then of course for this user, why not just use the DBO as the default schema. So that's the proper way of configuring this user. So now that this SQL broker is available in the SBO demo, this is not enough because this guy only has limited access. The next thing should be done is to assign this to be in this is the demo database. That guy must be data writer and data reader. These are the predefined roles in SQL Server. Okay, so we created our user. This is the user, the other was the login. So this was the login. Very tricky in SQL Server. First you create a login. This is a more or less an account, a login account, a public account, that is you have the access to login. This has a password, and this is the actual user, and then this user is linked to this account. Okay, let's check out what's going to happen. Yes, the message is very similar because the user doesn't have access to the SBO common database. Aha. So therefore we have to come back, and then let's create a access to the actual database, actual SBO common. When we come here in a security users, we don't have any users. So let's create a new user. Again, just use, it could be any name, but let's use it as SQL broker, and for login name SQL broker, and then default schema DBO, And for properties, for the SBO common, data reader should be enough, because we just want to read with this user the data from this SBO command. Let's see how it goes now. Here you go. It worked immediately. So just for the recap, to be able to read the data with SAP Business One, you need a user login and a login account, and then this login account should be defined for the actual company database that you want to give access to, read-write access, and then read access to the SBO common. Let's check out if we can execute a transaction. In my documentation, I have already prepared a sample to create an issue for production document. This is inventory gen exit. Okay, let's just copy this block from here. Come back to Postman, and then yep, and then the comment can be remained. Let's just simply remove this profile, because I just want to use the original profile. I mean the default profile. Okay, let's just send this transaction. Excellent. We were able to create, so that was, sorry, it was just a getter. What I wanted to say, I'm really sorry. I want to create a post, and this is not the way. We have to remove, otherwise we have an error message from the server. Then let's do it. We have to change to post, of course. This is the creation. So what I am expecting, either an exception, an error, or a 201, which is the created. Oops. Then we received another message that SQL Server, the execute permission was denied on the object SBO SP transaction notification. So this is an additional permission that we have to grant it to this user, but not on the SBO common. This should be done on the company database, as explained here in this comment. This should be done on the SBO demo US. So come to the system, and then in the SBO demo US, we have the security folder, and then we have here users and roles. For this experiment, let's do it in a how to say, a proper way. So when I come here to the database, let's create a role first. Create database role, and this role I'd give the name DB executor. It could be anything, but just to keep it in sync. For the owner, we could define, why not, SQLBroker. This is completely fine. Our user could be a definer. I mean the owner of this role. Okay, and then as role members, because this is just an executor, we can add our own user SQLBroker, because the owner is not automatically a member of that. And then when you want to define the executor permission, I didn't find any way to do it with this graphical user interface, in this interactive user interface. So now we created the DB executor role. When I double check our user SQLBroker to see if this user is a member, yes, no, it is a member of the data reader, data writer, and as well as an executor, of course, but this is just only a role at the moment. How can we define execution? This is the way to do it. Open the terminal on let me do it just a proper way. So we are on this database, right click, new query, and just simply enter grant, the typical SQL grant, execute to, and then DB executor, this guy. So this grants the execution command completed successfully. So to this executor for the whole database, SBO demo database. Let's come back to our sample and check out how it works now. So we are again trying to create a issue for production transaction. Here you go, 201 created. So we just managed to create an inventory transaction with the quantity of no, this was an inventory transaction. Let's go to business one and open the inventory, no, the production transaction, and then this was issue for production. Jump to the last one, and yeah, this was May 3. It was this transaction which I've just created. Practically this was it. Again, as a recap, you need to have a database user for your company database with so in a general panel, this is assigned or linked to the login user, SQLBroker. It doesn't matter. The two names is not required to be the same. And then for the membership, this is very important. Data reader, data writer, they are predefined. roles in SQL Server, but this DB executor I've just created as I've shown, and then also this DB executor I define on the command line for this database an execution permissions, and then also this is not enough to be able to, we also need to add a user to the SBO common, and this user is again linked to our SQLBroker login account, and then as a membership it's enough just to define the data reader. Okay, so this was the database user. Definitely this is the recommended way. Don't use, please, SA user. This is the user you should, this is the minimum what you should do. The next thing is that this Linda. So when we have a look again to our web config, we don't have here the username manager. Again, please do not use manager. Use a dedicated user, either fancy name. So in my system, I already had this Linda, but I could have already created a completely new one. And then what is important, then in the users, Linda. Okay, so this user I changed a password to this user. For example, this was the password. It really doesn't matter, but just let me show this. This was the password I defined for this user. This is what I defined here in SAP Business One. And then what is again important, that we have the licenses, and in the license administration, this Linda should be granted Keith, Leo, and Linda. Okay, I assigned indirect access user to Linda. Possibly the reason it is grayed out because Linda is connected. Let me just check out if this is the case. Stop the server. Completely. Yes, the screen cannot be just refreshed. License administration. Linda is still okay, and then what was important, that I defined an indirect access user. With this indirect access user license, this user, this Linda, is able to perform any transactions. So that was again very important. Instead of using the manager, I wanted the less privileged user for this role. I think that was all. I wanted to explain now.